Alright, imagine this. You're an astronaut floating above the thick clouds of Venus, staring down at the bright, golden planet below. From here, it almost looks welcoming. Romantic, even. Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love, after all. But make no mistake. Venus is not your friend. In fact, it might be the most hellish place in the entire solar system. We're talking temperatures hot enough to melt lead, atmospheric pressure that would crush a submarine, and clouds made of acid. So why can't we live on Venus? Why is Earth's so-called sister planet so absolutely unlivable? Let's dive into the scorching mystery of Venus, the planet that should have been habitable, but turned into a death trap instead. It's basically a furnace. Let's start with the most obvious problem. It's hot. Like, absurdly hot. The surface of Venus reaches temperatures of around 465 degrees Celsius, or 870 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than the surface of Mercury, even though Venus is farther from the Sun. How is that possible? 2 words: runaway greenhouse effect. Venus has a thick atmosphere made up of about 96% carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid trapping heat like a thermal prison. Sunlight gets in, but it doesn't get out. That heat bounces around the dense atmosphere, growing more intense until the entire surface becomes a giant oven. And here's the worst part. It never cools down. No night breeze, no seasons, no mercy. If you stood on the surface of Venus, you'd be incinerated in seconds, assuming you weren't crushed first. The pressure will crush you. Alright, let's pretend you have a super heat-resistant suit. You land on Venus. You step outside. Boom. Crushed. The atmospheric pressure on Venus is about 92 times greater than Earth's. That's like diving 3,000 feet under the ocean and trying to take a breath. Your body wouldn't stand a chance. Not even modern submarines or rovers can handle that pressure for long. In fact, the Soviet Union sent several Venera probes to Venus in the 1970s and 80s. Most were destroyed within minutes. One survived for just 127 minutes before it failed completely. Let that sink in. Venus destroys robots. The clouds aren't water, they're acid. Now let's look up. The thick, yellowish clouds covering Venus might seem like Earth-like weather at first glance. But they're not made of water. They're made of sulfuric acid. Highly corrosive. Highly toxic. And completely unsuitable for breathing or flying through without protection. Even if you could somehow float above the surface, say, 50 kilometers up where the pressure and temperature are less extreme, you'd still be surrounded by acidic mist and poisoned air. Venus's atmosphere has no oxygen. It's mostly CO2, with some nitrogen and traces of other gases that would kill you on contact. So forget picnics. You need a fully sealed, pressurized, acid-resistant, oxygen-supplying floating base just to hang out in the clouds. But Venus is Earth's twin. Right. Here's the part that really stings. Venus is Earth's planetary twin. Same size. Same mass. Similar composition. Roughly the same gravity, about 90% of Earth's. Billions of years ago, it might have even had liquid water, oceans, rain, maybe even an atmosphere more like ours. So what happened? The leading theory. Something went terribly wrong. Maybe Venus received more solar radiation because it's closer to the Sun. Maybe volcanic activity released too much CO2. Whatever the cause, it triggered a runaway greenhouse effect that spiraled out of control. Water evaporated. CO2 levels skyrocketed. Heat got trapped. And Venus cooked itself to death. It's a chilling example of what happens when climate control fails on a planetary scale. Could we ever terraform Venus? Let's be optimistic for a second. Could we fix Venus? Could we one day transform it into a livable world? In theory, maybe. But it would be the biggest engineering project in human history. Here's what we need to do. Cool the planet by removing excess CO2. That means either sucking it out of the air or converting it into something solid. Change the atmosphere by replacing toxic gases with oxygen and nitrogen. Fix the clouds, because nobody wants to live under a sky of acid. Handle the pressure, which means thinning out the atmosphere drastically. One idea is to use floating colonies high in the clouds, where pressure and temperature are more Earth-like. In fact, NASA's HAVOC mission concept explored this. Habitats suspended in the atmosphere at about 50 kilometers altitude. But even that would be insanely difficult, and very far from being self-sustaining or safe for humans. And terraforming the entire planet? Would take thousands of years, if it's even possible at all. Can we even visit safely? Okay, let's be more realistic. Forget colonization. Could we just send astronauts to Venus for a quick visit? Technically, yes, but not to the surface. A manned mission could orbit Venus, or maybe dip into the upper atmosphere with a balloon or drone. Scientists are fascinated by Venus because it's geologically active, with potential volcanoes. Its atmosphere may contain traces of phosphine, a gas that, on Earth, is associated with life. It helps us understand climate systems, and what can go wrong on a planet like ours. So yeah, Venus is terrifying. But it's also incredibly important to study. Just don't try to land there. A brief moment of hope, the Cloud City dream. There's one scenario that sci-fi fans love. A floating city in the Venusian clouds. At about 50 kilometers above the surface. The pressure is similar to Earth's. The temperature is a comfortable 30 degrees Celsius to 70 degrees Celsius. A breathable mix of nitrogen and oxygen would actually be lighter than the CO2 around it, meaning your habitat would float, like a balloon. It's still wildly dangerous, but conceptually, not impossible. That said, the acid clouds, radiation, and isolation make it more of a thought experiment than an actionable plan, at least for now. So why do we keep studying Venus? You might be wondering, if Venus is so awful, why bother? Because Venus might be the key to understanding Earth's future. It's a living cautionary tale, a planet that likely once had water, maybe even conditions for life, but lost it all. Studying Venus could help us understand climate change, explore how planets evolve over time, compare atmospheric chemistry across worlds, and maybe, even one day, help us prevent Earth from going down the same path. Venus shows us what happens when a planet turns against its own potential. Final thoughts. So, why can't we live on Venus? Because Venus is a hostile nightmare, disguised as a beautiful planet. It's hot enough to melt metal. The pressure is enough to squash steel. The air is poison. And the clouds will burn through your bones. Living on Venus isn't just hard. It's currently impossible. But studying Venus? That's not just possible, it's essential. Because if Earth is the success story, Venus is the tragedy. And in the vast cosmic experiment that is our solar system, understanding both may help us survive the future. If you found Venus as terrifying and fascinating as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Let us know. If Venus were somehow terraformed and made habitable, would you move there? Until next time, stay curious, and maybe keep your space vacations limited to low Earth orbit, for now. Because love may be in the name. But Venus? She's anything but gentle.